next best-selling book launches a month from tomorrow, April 18th. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I'm so excited to get some of the behind the scenes on it from you. Was a huge fan of Leave Your Mark, which everybody should go back and read over the next month before On Brand is released to the world. And I want to hear more about it. So first of all, like me, you've been in fashion and retail for decades. How has your long tenure in that sector influenced this book? And tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, first of all, Andrea, thank you for having this conversation with me. I'm really excited. I think it has everything to do with it. I spent, like you said, more than 2 decades working in fashion. I was a corporate PR executive for many years, 17 to be exact, at Donna Karan. And, back then, I think we all identified as our companies. Like it really became my personal brand to be Aliza from DKNY. But when my book came out, Leave Your Mark, in 2015, and I left the company, and after, my persona of DKNY PR girl, which had received millions of impressions around the world, I was kind of left with like an identity crisis of like, who am I now? So I had to rebrand myself, and I had to think about how I was going to transition from doing corporate public relations, which, by the way, I didn't want to do anymore at that time, into someone who would be known for maybe being a marketer, a social media strategist. Obviously, I had a book under my belt, so I was an author, but I needed to really kind of move on from that PR girl persona. And everything I did to do that is On Brand.
Yay! I can't wait to read it. So I'm glad you mentioned DKNY PR Girl, because you basically broke social media when you executed that strategy, which was all your brainchild. And then I think you broke social media again when it was released by when it was written about by the New York Times in 2015, 2012, 2015, 2012. Yes, because I actually remember where I was sitting at my dining table when I opened the New York Times and saw that. And I was like, oh my God, that's the story behind the story. And so thinking back on that, and you mentioned it a little bit, but that professional success has continued to be an underpinning of your story since then. So what advice do you have for other people who have had a big run and want to make that part of their brand going forward?
Great question. So first of all, just as a general piece of advice for everyone, what you do today may not be what you do tomorrow. And I think the best thing each and every one of us can do for each other is to remain in contact. I think a lot of people tend to like peace out when you leave a big role because you're no longer useful. And I think it really is, the people who don't do that really have such grace, because we all go through transitions and pivots. And now I forgot your question.
Well, I mean, that is great general advice, I think, for anybody. But specifically, as you think about how you've continued to talk about your success with DKNY PR Girl over the years, for other people who have maybe had a big professional success and want to continue to leverage that in some way, what's your advice there?
Well, to be honest, it was never like a big strategy of mine to continue leveraging it. I think that we all have multiple roles in our careers, and, it is perfectly fine to say formerly of, or former, whatever X, Y, and Z company. I would say for me, actually, after I left, and this is in the book as well, I made a strategic decision to, first and foremost, in all of my social media bios, say ex or former DKNY PR girl. And then as I transitioned with my plan to sort of rebrand myself into a marketer and actually a consultant at that time, I removed it completely. And I say in On Brand, it was like I took off the training wheels, because I think that at a certain point, you do need to move on. And to be honest, it's not something that I included on any of my social media anymore. I mean, you could Google it and find out that I was, but for me, I think the only reason why I'm still talking about it is because people are still asking me about it. Mm-hmm. So I think because in truth, that was 2009, and DKNY PR Girl was really one of the first examples of a fashion influencer, yes, even though we didn't know the word at the time. So I think it is I think it was groundbreaking for the time, and that's probably why we're still talking about it, but it's intrinsic to my story in my rebrand. So that's why it sort of starts off on brand anyway.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad that people are still asking you about it, because it was, I think, one of the most genius strategies. Not only was it your strategy, you executed it. So I think even if for you it was training wheels that you don't need to proactively talk about, I just love the fact that people still see it as this really, really valuable thing that you launched into the world, and it did set the standard for what everybody has done since.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You mentioned influencers, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, there are so many people who want to talk to you about this book, but because of my background and my audience's background, I want to talk about how people who are in fashion and retail companies can specifically apply some of your advice. So fashion companies are known for having big personalities at the top in many cases, not all, but you see the celebrity level designers and creative directors with their brands. So for more junior people or even executives in an organization like that, what advice do you have for them for building their brands proudly in a way that doesn't create the perception that they're trying to compete with these other brands, these other personal brands?
This is such a great question. And I think it's important to note with DKNY PR Girl, the character, it was a character, right? It was an anonymous character inspired by Gossip Girl. In no way did I intend for it to be me. It really was, it was a fashion illustration. It was not a person. It just became a person because I didn't understand that tweeting meant it was going to be the same voice over and over again, and people would realize that it's like one person, right? So I think first and foremost, there's two scenarios here that you're asking. One is, should a brand have a person as their face that is not, let's say, the head designer? And the answer is, it's tricky, right? Because when that person leaves, like I did, it becomes a little bit of a sticky situation. The second question is, should employees try to be building their personal brands externally or internally in the company, and how does that affect their standing? So I always start with sort of rules of engagement. Every single company has a different policy on press. Every single company has a policy on social media. You really do have to do your homework and understand what those rules of engagement are. I believe every single person should be leveraging their personal brand, right? I wrote it in a book on brand, but with caution. So never doing something, never grabbing 15 minutes of fame, which can ruin your company's standing. So really understanding who are your stakeholders, who's responsible for your growth and progress, and are they supportive of you going to speak at a conference, for example? So understanding that. And then secondarily, I do think that people who have online personal brands, let's say if you're deep in e-com, right? And you're constantly posting on LinkedIn your thoughts on what's happening in retail right now. Like, I think that just bolsters people's opinions of you as a thought leader on that subject. So I actually think it's important to establish that if you have a unique point of view. A lot of people want to be thought of as thought leaders, but to be a thought leader, you actually have to be bringing something to the conversation that is different and unique and coming from a place of deep thought, right? So, I believe that companies benefit when they have employees with strong personal brands. I think it's a symbiotic relationship, or it can be. There is always a scenario in which a company feels like, okay, this person's profile is getting too big for us. And that can then change the dynamic and make it a tenuous situation.
What would you say to executives who don't want their employees on social media because they think that it creates a distraction, or it means that the employee maybe is not loyal to the company and more focused on himself or herself? How would you coach executives who feel that way?
I would tell them to check their calendar's date. We're in 2023. I don't think a company should dictate what someone can do in their personal life. And if I were an employee at a company that said I can't be on social media, I would be looking for a new job.
Love the real talk there. Love the real talk.
I mean, yeah. Listen, back in the day, sorry to interrupt you, but back in the day at DKNY, I will never forget this. they didn't want us on social media during the day. So they blocked it from our computers. You could not go on social media platforms from your computer, but of course you can go on your phone. And then it became obviously ridiculous and it took over.
Right.
But those were so early days of social media that companies were freaked out. They were like, oh my God, where is productivity going?
Right. And that's interesting because it was more specifically about productivity than it was about, we don't want you doing it at night for potential conflicts or, showing a lack of loyalty or anything like that. It was just don't do it during the day. Yeah, I know. It's crazy how things have evolved because now in a lot of cases, you can't even do your job well if you're not able to, recruit somebody on LinkedIn or see what's going on with the news on Twitter. So
absolutely
change of the times for sure. And so finally, can you talk a bit about the value of owning your audience? We were just talking about social, so versus leveraging existing ones.
Social media is like a rental apartment. Your rent goes up by $1,000. All of a sudden you're looking for a new one. Or in the land of digital, you get locked out of your account, the platform disappears, they change the algorithm. All of a sudden your reach isn't the same. That is what a lot of creators are feeling right now. They're wondering, oh my God, especially on TikTok, like people were just ranking in the views and it's been like clamped down tremendously by the platform. The only way to own your audience is to really have email addresses and cell phones and to have a database. And the best way to do that is to create free content that is going to be sticky and work as lead generation for you to actually acquire that information.
I'm sure there are ideas in your book on exactly how to go about doing that.
Yes, of course.
How did I guess? Cannot wait to read it. And I hope that everybody does. Thank you so much for taking the time to give me some of the extra details.
Oh, thank you. It's great to talk to you.